This week on Let's Pod Crime, I'll be covering Joseph McCann. Born on the 8th of February 1985 in London, his father was a Scottish builder and his mother was from Irish traveller descent. He classified himself as being from a large traveller family and being one generation removed from travellers. At the age of around 10, he moved into a council house in Tyrol Walk, Beswick, Manchester. It was only a year or so later, in 1996, that Joseph and his two brothers, Sean, a year older, and Michael, 2 years younger, were known for running a campaign of intimidation and crime in their local area. It was at the tender age of 11 that Joseph first caught the attention of the police. It would be only 2 years later that he would get his first conviction for theft. This wasn't enough to scare him off a criminal life, and in the following months and years he would get more convictions for handling stolen goods, criminal damage and possession of a knife. It was reported by the local press that there were also incidents of stealing and setting fire to vehicles, muggings and threatening both younger children and the elderly. After multiple complaints from neighbours in the area, both the council and police started to collect information on the youths. They captured surveillance of the brothers vandalising property, damaging cars and throwing bricks at people. By 1998, enough evidence was captured to have the family evicted from their council home. However, the family didn't move far, this time moving to the Ardwick area of Manchester, less than 2 miles from Beswick, meaning the brothers would return to the area they had previously terrorised and would continue to do the same. What the Manchester Evening Post called a campaign of terror. A local police officer told the Guardian newspaper, "There was a perception that they were untouchable, the three boys caused an enormous amount of problems for local people and committed a range of antisocial behaviour." The police and local council continued to gather evidence against the boys, collecting it from the neighbourhood, and in 1999, when Joseph was 14 years old, him and both of his brothers were subjected to being some of the first people given an ASBO, or an antisocial behaviour order. This was an order which banned the youths from entering the Beswick area. Several of the conditions forced upon the youths were not to use or engage in abusive, insulting, offensive, threatening or intimidating language or behaviour in the city of Manchester, along with not threatening or encouraging in violence or damage against people or properties of the city, or encouraging other people to do so. It's safe to say that the brothers took these orders with a pinch of salt. When the trio left court that day, they were seen smirking and swearing at journalists. Regardless of what they thought about being given ASBOs, the Berwick residents were said to be relieved. With the police reporting that crime in the area fell by a third, burglary halved, and one supermarket even reported that after ASBOs were first introduced, their revenue rose by £14,000 a week. Over the course of the next 3 years, the brothers would fight the ASBOs put against their name, with the first case being rejected by both the Crown and High Courts. It was then heard at the House of Lords. The confusion lay on whether ASBOs were targeted at civil or criminal law. If it was deemed to be criminal law, it meant that hearsay was admissible in criminal proceedings. If it was deemed civil, it meant that people could appear as witnesses and give evidence in cases of people being intimidated. It was ruled that it was a civil matter, and as a result the McCann brothers lost the case against them yet again. During this time in 1999, the McCann family finally moved out of Manchester and moved south to the Aylesbury and Harrow areas, but they would still continue their criminal ways, damaging properties and stealing cars. The troubled brothers would continue to push the law, and by 2007 Joseph was living in Bedford and had become a father. Not that he was at the birth of his firstborn, as at the time he was away spending it in the pleasure of Her Majesty's prison system. Upon his release, he returned to his partner and child in a festive spirit, and on the 27th of December he burgled the home of an elderly man in Cotton End. He threatened the male with a knife and stole the man's money purse. McCann was spotted on CCTV and police instantly recognised him and he was arrested. He pleaded guilty to aggravated burglary, and in September 2008 he was sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in prison. As part of his sentence, he was given an IPP, an imprisonment for public protection order, meaning that he would only be released after completing the full sentence and after a parole board declared him as no longer being a risk to the public. Even after that, he would then be put on licence for 10 years, meaning any further criminal activities he would be instantly returned to prison. Once again, while he was being sentenced, his partner was pregnant with his second child. While being assessed, McCann was classified as posing a high risk of serious harm to the public and known adults, as well as medium risk to children, prison staff and prisoners. In 2011, his offender managers were given intelligence from 2003 which indicated that McCann might pose a risk of sexual harm and exploitation to teenage girls. This was after his prison intercepted letters suggesting that he had posed a risk of sexual harm in 2009. He would spend a total of 8 years in prison, with his parole being rejected in 2010, 12 and 14. During this time he carried out several courses of rehabilitation and risk reduction. He was finally released in March 2017 on licence. During his time in prison, his older brother Sean, while serving a 2-year sentence for assault, took his own life. After being released, McCann was assigned to spend a 12-week period in approved premises in East Anglia. At the end of the 12 weeks he was allowed to move back in with his family in Buckinghamshire. By late July he had started to go back and visit Manchester area once again. But when he was starting to return home, he would spend time with different family members in the Hertfordshire area, resulting in his offender manager being unable to contact him. It wouldn't take long for him to fall back into his old ways, and on the 18th of August 2017 he was arrested for car theft and burglary. As he was still on licence, he was remanded in custody until January 2018, when he was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison. While being sentenced, the judge remarked that this run would run concurrently with his IPP sentence. However, his offender manager did not recall him on this sentence. If he had done so, McCann would have once again had to go in front of a parole board before being released. Instead, he was released just halfway through his sentence. Upon his release, he was once again put on licence. This time, he was prohibited from pursuing relationships with females. In April 2019, McCann applied for housing in the Aylesbury area along with his new female partner. His application was denied after he became rude and aggressive towards staff members. As a result of this, his offender manager was contacted and he was found to be in breach of his licence due to being in a relationship. On April the 10th, he received a warning letter from the probation services. Just 2 days later, his older brother Michael was sentenced to 6 years and 11 months for driving offences, credit card fraud and a string of handbag thefts in 2018. Clearly annoyed by the orders on his licence and his brother going to prison for nearly the next 7 years, he decided to go on a 15-day spell of raping and threatening behaviour. Warning: some may find the following section of information highly disturbing. On the 21st of April 2019, Joseph McCann abducted and raped a 21-year-old female from the Watford area. He abducted her at around 3:30 AM after she was returning home from a night out. He forced her into his car at knife point, took her to a house and raped her over the following hours before releasing her on the same morning. Police identified him and added him onto the National Sex Offenders Police computer. However, they were unable to track him down, and just 4 days later he abducted a 25-year-old woman from northeast London, once again dragging her into his car, where he raped and sexually assaulted her for over a 14-hour period. Not satisfied with this horrid action, he attacked and abducted a second 21-year-old female at the same time, dragging her into his car while the other victim was still there. He then drove both females to a hotel and tried to book a room. One of the females managed to hit him over the head with a glass bottle, and both managed to escape. Police then released his mugshot, name and offered a £20,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. However, nothing useful came forward, and it is believed he was being sheltered by a support network across the country. On the 5th of May, McCann had returned to the Greater Manchester area, where he met a woman in a bar and she invited him back to her family home. Once inside the house, he tied the female up and attacked her children. He raped her 17-year-old daughter and 11-year-old son. The daughter managed to free herself and jumped out of the top floor window of the house before alerting neighbours. McCann fled the house, and around 1:30 PM he once again abducted another female. This time he forced a 71-year-old into his car and raped her. While still restraining her, he abducted a 13-year-old girl and sexually assaulted her too. He kept the two of them in the car, but they managed to escape while he was parked at the Knutsford services. He then drove to Cheshire, still all on the same day, and at around 6:30 p.m. he abducted two 14-year-old girls. This time he threatened to kill them. Police spotted his car and gave chase. McCann crashed his car and once again fled on foot. The two girls were shaken but unharmed. He managed to escape and flagged down a taxi. Police once again spotted him and set up a roadblock. As the taxi approached, he noticed it and fled again on foot. Police gave chase and discovered him hiding up a tree at around 3 a.m. the following morning. He was arrested and detained. On the 6th of January 2019, he was convicted on 37 offences. Just 3 days later he was found guilty and sentenced to 33 life sentences and was ordered to serve a minimum of 30 years. However, his case was taken to the Court of Appeal and an additional 10 years were added onto his sentence, meaning he will have to serve a minimum of 40 years before even being considered for parole. Had his offender manager recalled the judge on his sentence in 2018, where his IPP was run alongside his sentence, there is a strong possibility that his parole would have been rejected due to his high risk that he posed to the public. The Ministry of Justice carried out a review and concluded that the National Prison Service did not manage effectively or in line with the policies and procedures which set out the expectations for managing offenders who pose a high risk of harm. The standards of practice did vary significantly over time and between individuals. It also came to light that 10 different offender managers had managed McCann during September 2008 to February 2019. A high staff turnover and budget cut were blamed on his IPP not being recalled in 2017. On a personal note, after abducting, assaulting, raping and threatening the life of 10 people over a 2-week spell, which included raping 11 and 13-year-old children, along with abducting 2 other children of the age of 14 who were lucky enough to escape, I'm shocked nobody has murdered this animal yet. Thank you for joining me for this week's Let's Pod Crime.